Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or morning or whatever it is where you're at. This is When God Gets Your Attention with Barb, and I'm Tom. Today we're talking about strangers, how strangers can affect you greatly and, be sent by God or the divine forces to help you out. Um, Sometimes they assist us in very profound ways. Sometimes they assist us in very small ways that can be very helpful. And likewise, how do we treat strangers? What do we do with them? How do we treat people online that we don't know? Um, there's all kinds of angles that we can and will come at this topic today. So I'll turn it over to you, Barb.
Well, many of you have heard of strangers or friends you haven't met yet. And I would always tell my students also that people come into your lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And sometimes when we least expect it, somebody's going to come into our life and maybe introduce us to a new opportunity, maybe change our life, save us from a little situation that we talked about like last week, where you're running out of gas and a stranger comes over to help. And sometimes you have people, if you really think back in your own lives, I want you to be thinking about this for yourself. Who were the strangers that influenced you? Sometimes people have blind dates and they meet a stranger and they end up marrying the person or becoming partners with the person. Or maybe there's somebody where you meet a stranger and they tell you, here's my business card, go call this person, and you end up having a job opportunity. So those are all things that are really, when you really sit back and think back on it, it was designed specifically for you to move you to a different place. And even sometimes strangers who may be abrupt with us, or maybe we're abrupt with strangers, it gives us a chance to pause and rethink how we show kindness, how we show up in the world. And I think sometimes that's a way too for God to get our attention, and then for us to take action.
And like you were saying about strangers being abrupt, or, maybe somebody who's a stranger brings a harsh message that we need to hear. And then we consider it, we consider it later. What were they saying? Is this valid? Is this something we need to, pursue further? Or, another thing that came to mind for me was the stranger that we meet that influences us one way or another, maybe in a profound way, and then we never see them again. They're there and they're gone. That's always an interesting one as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens. I think I would say it probably happens to every one of us from time to time, or at one time or another. So yeah, there's so many different things. I like the friends you haven't met yet. You know, so much of the world today. Um, I was just thinking about online how, people treat strangers so poorly online. It's so easy to treat people poorly online that you don't know. And that's kind of taken a turn for the worse with social media and things like that. So that's interesting. And I think we need to keep in mind, these are our brothers and sisters. We are all God's kids, whether we agree with what they're saying or not. And We need to keep that in mind with all strangers, right?
Right. And I think what we're going to talk about today, and we want you to be thinking about this also, is we've sort of grouped the strangers into three categories that we've seen come up often. Strangers that impacted your life, strangers that changed your life, and strangers that saved your life. So we're going to start with some examples. Do you want me to start, Tom?
Sure.
Okay. So in my life, if I thought back, there's so many different people that I met because I've had many adventures. And I think sometimes you grow up in the same little circle and you know people in the town. And the way it used to be was everybody knew one another in the neighborhood. And that was a way to be safe, especially like when my, great grandparents came, my father's side from Italy, my mother's side from Austria, the Ukraine. They would come and they would stay with people that spoke the same language, that could help them get a job. So there was that trust of people that were like themselves. And then when we started to branch out, historically, we would go into schools and we would have kids that we would be in classes with and teams that we would be on, and we would be learning about other traditions and other kids. And maybe they were a stranger, but we had an opportunity to meet with them. So I'm going to have to plug my computer in a minute here. So if I bend down, that's why. But, one of the strangers that we're talking about three in particular. One of the strangers that changed my life has to do with the fact that we're wearing baseball caps today. I was in the Connecticut area, and I had come out to Arizona to do some field studies with teachers there. And I ended up reading the newspaper when I was done, and I noticed that there was a baseball coach at Arizona State University named Pat Murphy that had his players do some volunteer work with kids in a community that served the Yaqui Nation, which was a Native American tribe in the area around Tempe, Arizona. And I wrote to him and I just said, I was just impressed with your team and your outreach to care about others, in addition to putting your best effort out on the team, on the playing field. So I never thought anything of it, but I get a letter back on the ASU letterhead in Pat Murphy's handwriting. And he wrote, "Great to hear from you. Thanks for writing." And he asked me one question. "What is it that you do at the university back east that you can't do out here?" And I thought to myself, wait a minute, wow. Actually, there's nothing that I'm doing back here that I can't do out there. And so that one note was the impetus for me to make a change, for me to write to Arizona State University, send my CV and materials, and the rest is history, because they called me and they said, "If you come out here." I said, "Well, when are you available?" And so I went out in May to meet the associate dean and the director of teacher education. And this was in 1999. And I started my doctoral degree there. I taught teachers there, did my research there, completed my dissertation there. And I sat in the stands and watched Pat Murphy coach his ASU Sun Devils, who's many of them now who went, they were in the pros, they were in professional baseball, and they're out of professional baseball. And today, as we speak, Pat Murphy is the bench coach for the Milwaukee Brewers. All right,
Fighting for their playoff lives right
yes.
now.
Well, miracles happen. You never know. Look what happened with the Bucks, right?
Yeah, that's true. We'll see. We'll
So
see.
was there a stranger that had that kind of effect on you?
Um, well, you know what? I don't have a story in my back pocket like that.
All right. Well, I
um,
could go on to another story because,
Go ahead. Go
okay.
ahead. I know
Um,
you've got some really good stories. You know what? I have been affected by strangers, throughout my life though. I mean, I come across people all the time. Um, and just not I don't have that kind of dramatic story. I know that that's a really really neat story, and he really was able to help you out. I I have a story that involves you that I'd like to share real quick. We went Barb and I went to a spring training game here in Phoenix to see the Brewers, and we're walking to our seats, and there's a table with, I want to say, Hall of Fame outfielder, but multi-time All-Star outfielder George Foster was at this table, and I walk up to it, and I'm like, "Hey, George Foster. Wow." He reaches out and shakes my hand. And Barb's like, "Hey, George." Anyhow, they knew each other from way back, and I was surprised, and it was kind of a neat scene where I guess you worked together on some school board issues or some things like that years ago together. So
yeah,
anyhow,
yeah, that was
that
great. That
was
was nice. Yeah.
me meeting a stranger who, yeah, who you already knew. So
And it was good to
yeah.
see,
So
it was good to
anyhow,
see
go
him
on.
out here. And it was good, sometimes we don't really feel appreciated. Um, I remember when I wrote a note to someone who got me started with, I have had a passion for baseball for so many years, most of my life. My dad took me to my first baseball game, and I always found baseball to be soothing. I mean, some people would say it's boring, but whatever I was doing, I would, the cycles of my life would coincide with baseball. And I took my kids to see baseball games, and they got autographs, and I had to go to spring training. But I was a teacher in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I taught in an all boys school. So, I mean, we'll save that as another episode, maybe for World Series. But the fact is that George Foster also lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, and he and his wife Sheila raised their kids there. And so we collaborated on some sort of an education project together. But he felt so good to be recognized because he was part of the Big Red Machine. And sometimes when people, stay in, like many people will retire from academia, they spend their entire life with a company. But with sports, it's sort of hard because sometimes you have a certain amount of time where your body is going to cooperate to be a player. And unless you get into coaching or managing, it's sort of, I remember writing a note to Leonard Coleman once, and he was the commissioner, he was the president of the National League, and he had helped me get started with this program with teaching teachers, and baseball was sponsoring it. And he said, when I wrote to him, he said, "Well, I'm glad you're doing well. As they say in baseball terms, I'm a has-been." And it's sort of hard because I don't think, when God's looking to get our attention, God's looking to say, "You're an always been, and you always will be." We have this idea that we have a certain shelf life, or we have to look a certain way. And that doesn't help anything, because what you contribute is ongoing. So when you talk to George at that point and recognize how many home runs he hit, and it just made he felt special. And that's what's good about when you connect with sports, and you just have a chance to go out there and have fun.
So what's your next story? I know you've got
Again,
one.
I have these stories where I meet people, they just like show up, and I don't think it's random, you know. I think possibly because as I talked about before, in my career, I focused on education, but also the area was social studies and history and political science and economics and all that. So the person who impacted my life to give me advice was none other than the first Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Day O'Connor. I was a new assistant professor, and I was based in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I went to my first conference, and the keynote speaker at the end of they wait till the end of the conference so that everybody stays, was Sandra Day O'Connor. And she was talking about the law and the Constitution. And then when the conference was over, people were making their way to the airport. And so I was on a Southwest flight from San Diego back to Phoenix. And so was Sandra Day O'Connor. She didn't go first class. She was a regular person, and she happened to be sitting next to me. So I'm in the middle seat. She's over here. We start talking, and I was like, wow. And I knew who she was. And as a social studies professor, it was like, you know, this is amazing. I can tell my students. And when she found out I was a social studies professor, she starts pulling out, she opens her purse and she pulls out her copy of the Constitution. She says, I always carry it with me. So she's there going through the Constitution, a specific section that she wanted to share. But what she impacted me with was two things. The first was just being like a regular person, like a mom to me. She said, so where do you teach? And I told her where. And she said, well, you know, I was born and raised in Arizona. And I would promise me you're not going to drive up there tonight. I said, well, she goes, no. They're going to have a storm on the way up to Flagstaff. And I don't want you to be driving. I really prefer, could you just get a room down here? Can you just stay in Phoenix? Let this storm pass. It's just not safe to be on those roads because I grew up here, I know. And you know what? I listened to her. I stayed over in Phoenix, and it was nasty weather, and she impacted my life to keep me safe. But she also told me that if you are going to be teaching social studies, it's so important. It's so important for kids to learn about civics and about our country and how these rules were designed, and they have stood the test of time, and we have a democracy. And I was just like at the foot of, I just was a novice listening to somebody like, first of all, she's smart. Second of all, she's savvy, and has tons of experience, and she's real.
Supreme Court.
Yes. I'm from Arizona and the first woman. Yeah. She's retired now. So we bless her in retirement. Mm-hmm.
And I think when we have these encounters, we need to look at them. They're not accidental.
Right.
You know, I don't think it's any accident that you, as a social studies professor, are sitting next to a Supreme Court justice who happens to be from Arizona, who happens to, you know, give you a very, very huge safety tip to somebody that doesn't know, you know, because those roads can be very treacherous. And in Arizona winter storm, going up those mountain roads, even though they're interstate, that's not accidental, you know, and that is God getting our attention, you know. So that's a good time again to take pause and reflect and, you know, have gratitude and all of that as well.
Well, you know, getting back to what we talked about the first week and what we want listeners to be thinking about as well, and viewers, it's like, so, okay, so God gets your attention. We talked about the now what's. the now what's, and there are 6 of the now what's. Now what do we do? And the push off the cliff moment is when, okay, you had your chance, but now, boom, we're going to get, and that we also call the wake up call, or when you are going to surrender. There's nothing else you could do. But there's also the chance for you to repurpose. There's also the chance for you to be, making a choice, making a change, and considering the information you received. I mean, if I decided to say, well, no, I'm going to go on up to Flagstaff anyway, it would have been, I could have had a bad accident because it was, black ice. We don't, there's not many, the roads are not always lit, you don't see it because it's not like a highway that has the lights on there. And, you have to have that opportunity to make that choice. But the message came in. And the same thing with Pat Murphy writing me back. I mean, he wrote me back. He asked me that question. And then I asked that question to myself. And it was as if, wow, he wrote me back and he asked me this question. Well, maybe it's a chance for me to take a different road. Maybe it's a chance for a new chapter. And so when that happens for you, for every one of you out there, who is the stranger who's coming in? What are they saying? What's the message? And how does that relate to you? Because, spirit signals are designed specifically. They're not random. So that's what we're trying to have you understand too, that you might, because especially if you recognize it, you'll say, wow. It's just like if somebody is a budding, baseball pitcher and they sit next to somebody. I mean, you see the person is connected to something that's going to move you forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah. What do we do with that information? Is it that wake up call that we need? And she laid a lot of information on you about the Constitution and teaching your kids civics and, other things of a professional nature, as well as the safety advice. I mean, she had a big load of impact for you. And for her, it was just another flight, back to Arizona or wherever she was headed. Right.
Yeah, I think I read her biography she wrote with her brother, and it was just like, I was so impressed with her authenticity and her humility. She didn't take a private plane back. She was on Southwest with all the rest of us. And that just made us look like we were citizens. And that's what's so, amazing about America. I mean, you were in the Air Force. I was born in the Air Force Base, and there is something about that where you could come from humble beginnings. And she was a rancher's daughter and, got an education at Stanford and, made her mark. But also, I think what she also did too, and this is what happens to us at different stages in our lives, she passed the baton on to me in a way, and I passed the baton on to my students there, because there comes a point where somebody who is maybe retiring or maybe getting to a certain point in their career, they have so much advice. That's why we have pitching coaches in baseball, because they can go and they could be standing on the third base line and they could be looking at, is this guy going to be able to make it home? I better just hold him over there. I mean, they're able to see things. A pitching coach is able to see, his arm looks tired. He's just like his shoulder is like off kilter. They're able to see some things that we can't see. And that's because they've had that experience in their life. And sometimes when I would go in to observe, my student teachers, I would be able to go in there within 5 minutes, I would be able to see something. And that's the same thing with doctors, where they're able to diagnose symptoms based on how you present. So I think that all the people that come into our lives, and maybe there's somebody who just comes into your life at the gas station, those are other encounters that I want us, and I know myself, I'm always thinking now, I'm more vigilant, I'm more aware that even if I'm busy, God's going to come and get my attention and be with me.
And I I just got one story that I heard from a spiritual teacher, Carolyn Mace, and she was telling the story of she was getting feedback from people for a book, and this young Japanese woman had told her, sometimes I look at people on the bus or on the train or whatever it was, and I look at them and I look them in the eye and I smile,
Mm.
and I think to myself, maybe just have a nice day. Like like maybe she was, there's an interpretation factor there, right? A language barrier perhaps, but maybe just have a nice day, meaning sending them a silent blessing. And that's something we can do with strangers every day. When you're walking around in the grocery store,
Mhm.
are you, you know, on a mission to get out of there as fast as possible? Don't look at me, don't make eye contact with anybody. Or, are you pleasant to other people? And maybe you could even think of sending them that silent blessing. Maybe just have a nice day, you know,
Mhm.
or even smile at them and see what happens. See what their reaction is. I think most people are, it might be a little uncomfortable for some, and other people will appreciate that as well.
There's certain places, like when you travel
You know.
around the world, you find that there's certain places where people are friendlier than others. And you feel so good when you are a stranger and you're in some place that's not familiar to you. And when somebody does welcome you or smile, you just feel you just feel connected, and that's warms your heart. When I had a project in my class for my undergrads, and it was called The Ripple Effect of Giving Up Your Story, which we talked about in maybe the first episode, about interviewing somebody about one event in history. But I always told my students, I said it's like what I would call Forrest Gump syndrome. Forrest Gump, the movie, where Tom
Mm-hmm.
Hanks is sitting on a bench, he's waiting for the bus, and people come by and they start to tell him their story. So he basically is sitting on the bench and he's listening. He's a good listener. And they end up getting the bus comes and they get on the bus, and Forrest Gump is still sitting there. And somebody else comes by and they start doing the same thing. So sometimes what you also wonder about is how a stranger will come in and allow you to just maybe unload some of your story or some of what's kept you from becoming your best self, because you've just been keeping it in because you maybe didn't want to share it with people that you knew. And he was just a stranger listening with not making any judgment, but just being there. And so sometimes you don't know who wants to tell their story. Many times from the research that I've done, we had data that showed a significant amount of grandparents who would share it with their grandchildren, but they wouldn't really share the story so much with their own children. But sometimes you just get random people who said, nobody ever asked me. You asked me, so I will tell you. And I think that's another aspect of this. And sometimes it happens, more when you are in a face-to-face context where you build up trust with people, and then they open up a little bit of their heart a little bit more, and that's what's granted
Mm-hmm.
access. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I I mean it's like the ripples in the pond. Like when you throw a stone
Mhm.
into a still water and it sends out the ripples, and that's, everything's energy, and we give out that energy to people, whether we're being a blessing to them or whether we're being just the opposite, and we can send out those ripples, of goodness, or we can send out those ripples of not so good, with the people that we meet out on the street, um, or wherever we're at. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, and as well, they do that for us. They do that for us too. They can lift us up when we're having a bad day. Somebody can just maybe give you a smile and send you a blessing, or be there and, like you said, listen to you, or just affirm that common bond that we all share as people walking around. That we're all here. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all God's kids.
There's so many
So
situations, and I really think that when people are watching this or they're listening to it, they will see that they'll recognize that there are strangers that they've met during the day, and how maybe they didn't even know about it, but they smiled to somebody or said hello, and that made the person's day. And I think that when you have that exchange, that exchange between two people, where everybody benefits because they're both giving, both giving and receiving. So I don't know. I have one more, but I don't know if we have time. We're looking at our time here.
Well, you know what? We can save that for next time.
We
I'm
could.
sure we are just scratching the surface of this topic, I believe, and we can come back again. I'm sure we'll come back to it again and again. So um, that's probably all we have time for.
Yeah, I
Are
think
we
so.
are we running out?
I think, yeah, I think we are at a good spot for us to just ask the question to members of our audience to think about the people who came into your life that might have impacted your life, that might have changed your life, and might have saved your life. And you don't have to be somebody who's in the healthcare field, or as you are, Tom, the ambulance driver, or somebody. I mean, people
Yeah.
save your life by listening, by smiling, and sometimes they don't even know it. Saving your life is also maybe uplifting your spirit too.
I've come in contact with strangers today just taking my dog to the dog park.
I think
And
we
we
have
talked, and
we have to have an
the dog,
episode where Bandit is on Bandit comes on to say hi.
he's laying on the floor right next to me.
Wow, he's behaving himself today. Is he
He
sleeping
is. He's all tired out. He
from being in the
ran and
dog
ran.
park? So
Yeah,
I'll just say goodbye, because I'm gonna be traveling a little bit to go see my mom, and maybe next week we could have my mom be our first guest on the program. We'll see how it goes.
that would be great. I would love that.
Yeah,
Tell
she'd
your
like to
mom I
see it.
said hi. I miss her.
Okay, I will. All right, everybody, we're gonna say goodnight or goodbye, and or ciao ciao, and we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.